Good afternoon, everybody. For this session, I'm going to talk about one of the more challenging, but in my experience, also fulfilling. Do I have the screen, Linda? There you go. Okay, I want to make sure you can see my PowerPoint. Okay, I'll keep talking. I think it's a more challenging aspect of community ministry, but can also be one of the most fulfilling ones. So this is really about encouraging and equipping people in your church to engage in community ministry as volunteers. This is what we're called to as Christians. It's really part of the essence of what it means to follow our faith. And so I think it's more than just, getting some bodies to fill some slots. It's got to be more than that if we're really going to do this right. So I want to talk about recruiting volunteers, but it's also equipping the saints, calling forth the body of Christ to really be Christian. So this is a little bit about me. You can email me. I am a consultant and a trainer, so I do training on this and a variety of other topics for around the country, and I do teach webinars for other groups. Typically, my consulting will focus on working with churches and nonprofits on visioning and planning, fundraising, board training, and then community engagement strategies. And I think my juno.com email address is in this as well, and maybe email me at the Juno one if you've got questions or interested in consulting. This is the 7 models for creative models for community ministry book published by Judson. So you can order it here. This is part of the book, the content that we're going to talk about today, but really it's for churches that have decided this is important to them, and they're going to be more about structuring and making some decisions about which model to pursue. And then these are my first 2 books. They're available at Roman and Littlefield now, and the web address is there. Starting a Nonprofit at Your Church is for congregations that would like to set up a separate 501c3 nonprofit. Usually it's to be an umbrella or a house for community ministry or community development programs, so that's a step-by-step book there. And then Winning Grants to Strengthen Your Ministry is just what it says. It's like everything you need to know to put together a winning proposal for corporate or foundation grants. It's got some chapters in there on how to talk to funders who aren't faith-based, even though you are. So you can order those if you like. So I'm going to start by talking about a couple of my biases, and then I'll launch it. We'll talk today about how to do this, how to connect with people in your congregation so that they'll be motivated to and interested in volunteering for community ministry efforts. My bias is always going to be that long-term volunteer investment leads to greater transformation for everybody. So for the volunteers and for the community, I think it's easier to pull together events once or twice a year, but the greatest impact comes through ongoing relationships between people. So I live in the city, and I do a fair amount of my consulting in the city, and I have to say city ministries kind of get tired of, well, it's often suburban churches that will pull together a group of people to come into the city maybe one day a year, 1 week a year, to come in and do whatever, and then they leave again. There's a higher value in having volunteers show up consistently, particularly for mentoring programs. If you're going to tutor a student, you've really got to have the same person doing that consistently, preferably weekly. If you were going to do some kind of job coaching, that would be another example of a consistent volunteer opportunity. So that's what I'm talking about, and I realize, and it'd be interesting to hear from you at the end in the question section, what kind of challenges you're facing in your church around time, people's time. So are they really pushing back on the consistent volunteer idea? And if so, maybe you're able to recruit a smaller group of consistent volunteers who can volunteer on a regular basis, and then it's more like quarterly or something. You've got a more casual volunteer opportunity that you offer. Make sure those opportunities are of value to the groups you're partnering with, however. And then you're really looking for two-way benefits for both the community and for the volunteers. So the community truly benefits from receiving all these people from your church, and also the volunteers benefit from the experience. So people enjoy it, they can see an impact, and they can learn more about the community. So here's a slide on covering what I'm going to, kind of summarizing what I'm going to cover today. Mobilizing people for the right reasons is really important. Another important step is to discern the passions and gifts within your church. I think choosing your partner organizations carefully. So some churches will partner with nonprofits, other churches and organizations in the community, and recruit volunteers to mobilize out. So Habitat for Humanity would be an example of that. Or if you're recruiting mentors for a youth program in your area. Some churches have their own community ministry programs and need to recruit volunteers for those. So the partner organizations piece wouldn't apply to you as much if you've got programs at your church. I think you need to develop opportunities, so be really intentional about saying we need volunteers to do these 3 things, these 4 things, and actually putting it in writing. So you're not just saying to people, why don't you just show up and we'll figure it out as we go along. Most people don't respond well to that. And then communication is essential. So I think we need to mobilize people for the right reasons, and that involves using the truth. So truth is powerful. That's a part of our faith. I don't think guilt ultimately works. So let's not mobilize people out of guilt. Might work short term. Ultimately, I don't think it works. And I don't think, as I mentioned in my intro, I don't think this is just about getting stuff done. So some churches I've attended acted like getting you to sign up was, here, sign your name on the line. We're desperate for people, and we have to plug you into slots so we can get this done. I don't think that's what this is about. We were made to do this. So God made us to serve. And in the Old Testament, in Proverbs, we see anyone who oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God, spurring us on to kindness. And then in Hebrews, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. We know that we are uniquely gifted to serve our communities, and we ought to do it out of our love for God and our desire to use the gifts that He has given us. So I think we ought to operate from this foundation in encouraging people to move out of the pew and into the community. And to do that, we really need to understand the gifts and passions in our congregation. I love this photo. I'm assuming it's Photoshop, but I don't know. Maybe this was after a building campaign or something. So I think being able to talk about spiritual gifts is really important. I think it's part of the role of church people to really, church leaders to really help people learn about their gifts so they can find the right fit in the church. So I like the scripture on the body in 1 Corinthians 12. We know that feet can't see and eyes can't walk us to where we want to know. So everybody is really needed in this picture. There's not a pecking order with God. And I'd be interested in hearing during the question time too how you're helping people identify their spiritual gifts in your church. Some people use inventories. I really like classes on this. I've seen more churches do like a series of Sunday school classes or adult education time, or even if you do small groups. If you've got sort of seasons of small groups during the year, maybe you're all studying a book together on spiritual gifts. So people would do some study in Scripture and read that book and just be in a group together and kind of reflect on, what spiritual gifts do I have and what does that mean? It's also important to be able to discern the passions of your church. So I think it can be helpful to look back at the kinds of community ministry that your congregation has engaged in over the years. And is there a thread, for example, running throughout your church's history about programs for children? Maybe it's been a focus on university students. In this case, there's a focus on immigrants and refugees. So I do a lot of work directly with church congregations on helping them discern their identity. And we'll look at church history, and a lot of times there is a thread or a focus. that can help lead us forward into the future. One way to tell passions is what are people always talking about? So kinds of issues, kinds of programming. One thing I learned as a member of a church staff, I've served on the staff of 2 different church congregations. The people in the church who didn't know each other kept bringing up a particular outreach or ministry and talking to me about it, then maybe I needed to start paying attention. So in one church, people started talking to me about the need for legal services in the neighborhood. And I was working on something else at the time, and people kept bringing it up, and I kept thinking to myself, they should leave me alone because I'm trying to do my work. And after a while, it dawned on me, oh, I think maybe God's trying to do something here. Some of these people didn't even know each other. We had 5 attorneys in our congregation at the time. And out of that came a free legal clinic that was heavily utilized by immigrants in our neighborhood. And I think another way to look at passions is the kinds of volunteer opportunities people tend to sign up for. So, for example, if your people always show up for a hands-on kind of volunteer opportunity, might be neighborhood cleanup, might be building a house with Habitat for Humanity or something, a little more behind the scenes, so not direct people contact. That would be a good heads up for you on kinds of work people are passionate about doing. And then there are relational volunteers, so these are the people who are passionate about developing other people and helping them to really develop and grow and learn. So teachers and mentors, for example, are relational volunteers. People who always volunteer to work with kids in your youth group or to teach Sunday school, those would be relational volunteers. And if you're doing community ministry programs, you know, if you had, I'm working with a church right now that has a nonprofit focused on senior citizens. If you had people who are trying to be friendly visitors, really to walk with people and their caregivers through the process, that would be an example of a relational volunteer. And then there are leadership volunteers, and these are all in the community ministry book, and there's more of a description of these, but people who are gifted at planning, visioning, raising, and managing money. And then I'd put marketing and communications in this category also. So you're people who are looking towards the future and then putting these organizational pieces into place so that you can get there. I tend to fall into this category, so I'm not ashamed to say that I really don't like teaching Sunday school. When I go around and speak around the country, people often frown at me when I say that. But if there's a visioning process to be led or contributed to, that's the kind of thing that I do. I'm sitting on the search committee for a new rector for our congregation right now, and that seems like it's a pretty good fit for me because we're talking a lot about where do we really want to head as a church, and that's where I live all the time. And then you can also tell people's passions and maybe discern their spiritual gifts also by knowing the people in your congregation well, so that you can notice their gifts, what they're drawn to, and what they aren't gifted at. And I've even seen in quite large churches, if the staff are really devoted to that, it might be possible between all of them to actually really know people in the congregation well enough to be able to notice things about what they're passionate about and what their spiritual gifts are. Another way to figure this out, you know, like where are people passionate and gifted, is to pilot something and then assess the interests. So if you're really not sure, you know, create some opportunities and see who volunteers for what. And people often land in things that they're gifted at. So my dad is a good example of kind of using all of his gifts, his spiritual gift and his skills. So he was very mechanically gifted. He could fix pretty much anything and then build many things. And then he also had the spiritual gift of evangelism. So when I was a kid, he started the bus ministry at our church. So he went and bought used school buses, and he was able to fix them. So one of my memories of my dad is I'd have to go crawl under the bus to talk to him because he'd always be laying under the bus fixing the bus. And then he loved to visit people in our neighborhood to talk to them about Jesus. Nowadays, I don't even know if that would work, but we called that visitation. And then he'd fix the bus, and then he'd drive the bus around and pick kids up for Sunday school on Sunday morning, and that brought him great joy, and I feel like it was probably the best use of him. So next I'm going to talk about actually creating volunteer opportunities. So you have to think about what people are passionate about, what their spiritual gifts are, the kinds of volunteer opportunities they tend to sign up for, and given those things, you're going to look for some community partners who fit with your church. So preferably, and these might be nonprofits, they might be other churches, other kinds of organizations. Best case, they'd be tied to the interests and passions of your people. Another important thing to think about is that they'd be ready to receive the number of volunteers you have and the kinds of volunteers. And then you want to make sure they'll make volunteering a good experience. So do they provide training? Is there oversight of the volunteers when they're there working? And that also they'll be nice to the volunteers. So I've certainly experienced a mismatch of this with churches over the years. So sometimes very large churches have a hard time partnering with smaller grassroots nonprofits, for example, because the nonprofits aren't ready to be host to 50 people who will show up to serve a meal. So sometimes you have to kind of match the size of your church to a size of organization, and then you don't want to send your people to some place where they're not going to have someone around to kind of supervise them, be there to answer questions, or if the people are mean. Every once in a while I run into nonprofit leaders who are kind of mean, and I always think I would not recommend that people I know go volunteer there. So here are those written in words on a slide. I think if their follow-up is another thing. Do they follow up and communicate well? So again, that if you're going to work with volunteer-led nonprofits, the response time is probably going to be longer, or smaller nonprofits. So if you really need somebody who's going to respond to you within 24 hours, that'd be an important thing to think about when you select a partner. One way to create opportunities is to look to people in your congregation who work for or volunteer with potential community partners. So they can often be a great champion and help recruit other volunteers. So a lay leader already works with a nonprofit or a program can be really enthusiastic about it and can just kind of be like a magnet for other people. So that could be one way that you pick a community partner. And you're looking to kind of take the scariness out of volunteering, so that's why I'm saying you need to create opportunities for people, not just say, like if you're going to recruit people to work on an after-school program, you wouldn't just want to say, show up after school and we'll see where we can plug you in. And to me, a lot of I'm kind of flexible, kind of go with the flow person, but in my experience, most people want it pretty fleshed out. So I worked with a church and we were going to set up a partnership with it was a pretty high-level care facility that was built 3 blocks down the street from the church. So if you can go out the front door of your church, stand on the steps, and see a nonprofit or a school, it's a pretty good bet you at least ought to go over there and check things out and see if they need some help, because I think geographic proximity is a great way to figure out who to partner with. But so they were working with people who had really severe disabilities, so who lived there, traumatic brain injury, and then Huntington's disease and some other severe neurological diseases. So people really couldn't communicate very well, and they were in a wheelchair all the time. So just needed volunteers to come over and kind of hang out with them, and watch TV or play a game or something. But people at the church really wanted that spelled out, like what exactly would I be doing when I go over there? And maybe they felt a little nervous, that's okay. But I had to go over and meet with the activities director and really get detailed information, like we bake cookies, there's a garden. If you want to go on field trips, we like to go down to the park. We take a group to the state fair every year, and if you ever come to Minnesota, come during the state fair because that's a really big deal here. It's the best state fair in the nation, regardless of what Texas says. But anyway, so they really wanted things to be spelled out, and so that's the point I'm trying to make. So what you're trying to do is make it really easy to say yes to the volunteer opportunities. So creating job descriptions is a really good idea. So each one of those would include key tasks the volunteer is responsible for, when and where the volunteering will occur, also the number of hours per week or month that are required. That's really good for people to know. And I just, like I said, people find it hard to say yes to vague requests for help. Yeah, and I'll often talk to people and I'll say, well, do you think you could help out with the missions dinner at our church? No, I'm too busy with that. Well, do you think you could go pick up the hot dogs and all the paper products to help with this event? Oh yeah, I could do that. So that's what we're talking about, is to kind of break it down into pieces. Yeah, here we go. Break the big projects down into small pieces. So, for example, if you're going to do some youth programming, you would be looking for some people to prepare the snacks. So this is what I volunteered for at Vacation Bible School in the years that I volunteered, because like I said, really am not big on teaching kids. But I can be snack lady, so I get really excited passing out and we do healthier snacks on cookies like this. So carrot sticks and hummus and whatever we decided to do. We had olives one year and raisins. And so yeah, giving the snack to the kids really makes me happy. You might be looking for people to lead Bible study, and there are people that are very gifted in that and passionate about it, and they might say yes to that. Maybe you need people to help with the game time. So one of my clients told me once it's hard for her to find adult volunteers who can actually are physically fit enough to run around with kids for half an hour, and that made her sad. But if that's your passion, you know, and you're pretty fit, you could be used in that capacity. And then I often think that it's you know, it's good to have something for people who are at home. So maybe people need to be called with reminders, and I find calling volunteers and kind of reminding them what they signed up for and that they need to show up or that they need to come to training really increase your turnout rate a lot. And this would be something that maybe somebody who's housebound because of health issues or because they have a little baby or some little kids and it's harder for them to leave the house at night could help with. So these are some questions to bring back to your church that you might use when you get together with your church leaders. So what kinds of volunteer opportunities would be most appealing to the people in your church? So what kinds of organizations would you be working with, when and where, and then doing what types of work? So another thing to keep in mind is that consistent communication about volunteer opportunities is really important. So I always say church people need to be talked to about 5 times by something. So it's like you're saying, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Here it is, and there it was. So like even doing a follow-up at the end to describe what happened. So you have to ask yourselves the question, is there a regular place or space for these opportunities and the results to be communicated? And I think it's ideal if you can weave community ministry into the life of your congregation, right, into the fabric. So you could weave this into an overall theme and a teaching and preaching focus, for example. So I talk in some of my webinars about how I don't think this community ministry ought to just be one thing on the checklist, but putting it into youth ministry, it might be in women's ministry and men's ministry. For example, one of the best ways to find new volunteers is to ask current volunteers to recruit new volunteers because they have their story about how great it is. So one of the churches I was on the staff of had this huge tutoring program in 2 local public schools that really needed it. We were working with kids on reading skills, and our greatest source of new volunteers were the people who were doing the work now, and they just talked about how awesome it was and what a difference they felt that they were making, and they really were making a big difference. So volunteers are real enthusiastic. And then communication during worship services. I think for any major opportunity you want to present to the congregation, you really need to talk about it on Sunday morning during worship. It can be really hard to convince church leaders and even the pastor to let you carve out that time. And I have the spiritual gift of making announcements on Sunday morning, so just know that these always need to be really brief. So I would even write it down and rehearse it, or select somebody who can be very brief and who's a good speaker, so that you don't have somebody up there rambling on and on about something and being unclear. And usually you say something very compelling about the opportunity and then say, this is what it is. We need people to do X, Y, and Z, sign up out in the hall afterwards, and these are the dates that we're going to be doing the work, or the volunteer opportunity is available. Personal testimonials, like I said, could be really powerful as part of an announcement on Sunday morning, what people have seen and what's happened to them, and the difference that they feel that they're making through volunteering. And then you're telling a story, and I think looking at your written publications, whether those are electronic or actually still on paper, and I sometimes feel like the paper ones, they're old school, but like people's email boxes are so full now, I think they might be more apt to look at a piece of paper that comes in the mail than to read something in email. I don't know. You could tell me what you think about that during the question time too, if you found that to be true. But you're looking at your bulletin, if you have a church newsletter of some type, whether it's electronic or paper, and then program brochures would be another example. I think you should emphasize stories and not just facts. So you could track an individual volunteer through their experience, or have them write about it. Report back from a volunteer on the experience and the impact of their work. And then make sure that you're following up and saying, hey, we've been at the public school sending in tutors for 6 months now, and this is what's happened. We're working with 15 kids, and we've worked with them on these kinds of projects, and this is the kind of feedback that we're getting from teachers and parents and the students. And do remember to report on the results of the effort. So this looks like some sort of a fix-a-thon or paint-a-thon. So I would make sure you tell people what happened. What were the results of that? And then make sure you're sharing on Facebook. I don't know if you all have Twitter accounts, but young adults are more apt to sign up for things via social media. Instagram is really popular now too. Facebook gets said as kind of for old people. I guess I'm a little old, so I still use Facebook, but interested in hearing from you about that as well. What I find is people of a certain age are on Facebook for events. So my husband and I just started a small group with another couple our age, and it's for young adults. So the youngest people in the group are like 23, and the oldest are about 32 or 33. And they look on Facebook every day, so to set up an event or to set up a communication thread through messaging is a really good way to get a hold of them. So that's what I'm thinking about for your volunteer opportunities. Set it up as an invite on social media. I think a lot of people forget about informal communication networks, so I don't know, figure out how to use those effectively. One church I worked with, it was people in the choir that would spread information throughout the church, and sometimes it was more like gossip, or it was kind of destructive, but I thought, well, I think I'm going to try and use that for good. So I told them all about this project we were doing, and pretty soon everybody knew about it. So that's what I'm talking about. Are people that have a large network or are connected to a lot of other people. I mean, if they sign up to volunteer, man, they probably will bring a lot of other people with them. And then I would use church events also. So if you have an annual dinner, some kind of quarterly meeting, social events, anytime the entire congregation gets together, just say, hey, don't forget we're doing this. We're working on the habitat builds. Last year we sent this many volunteers. Last year we sent 50 volunteers. This year we're trying to go for 70. Don't forget, I'll be in the back of the room as you leave if you want to ask me questions about it and sign up. So here's another question for you to bring back as you're sitting with church leaders. How could you best communicate volunteer opportunities in your setting? And I think you really need to look at how people in your church receive information. So whatever that looks like. So I talked about young adults and social media. I worked with a church last year that people didn't think they were serious unless It was in the paper newsletter from the church, and there was a potluck after the Sunday service to talk about it. So people really like to get together and hear it, you know, right from the people involved about what was happening. They didn't think it was real unless they had a potluck about it. Sounds kind of labor intensive to me, but that's what worked in that setting. Some tips for you would be to make sure you thank your volunteers. I think it can be something really simple like this, where you just have a little food. I've worked with churches where they had Volunteer Sunday, and people who had been volunteering regularly had something special on their name tag, a ribbon, or they got a flower, you know, a little boutonniere or corsage. Or I've seen groups do Volunteer of the Year award, so then that's something for people to strive for. Be personal in your thank yous, I would say. So I just think people really don't necessarily want a reward or some kind of favor or premium for volunteering, just getting a personal thank you note. And those have really gone by the wayside in our increasingly electronic society. But yeah, the gentleman who just left our church, who was the rector, would send out handwritten thank you notes, and it was very disarming. Always opened them up, hand addressed envelopes, and they were very effective. You could hold an event too to say thank you for people. And then, like I said, recognize outstanding volunteers. So here's some people holding plaques. We got some kind of a recognition. And then I've got a few tips to finish up with. I think thinking about different groups of people in your church, and are they apt to volunteer for different kinds of things? So often there might, if I work with churches and they say I just can't get anybody to sign up to help with this, it's because there's a mismatch with people's stage of life. So if I work with a church that has a lot of older seniors in it, people might not be excited about coming out at night. You know, they might have physical limitations too, so putting them up on the ladder at the habitat build might not be the best option for them. Or young, you know, so I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. So think about that, like what kind of ages and stages are represented at your church. I think, you know, if you've got a lot of families with young kids, parents are always looking for opportunities where they can engage with their children. Not every nonprofit or organization will take children as volunteers, so that'd be important to look at when you're looking for community partners if you want kids to be allowed in. So a lot of times there are liability issues that really can't be addressed, so they have to say we can't have anybody under the age of 18 or 15 or whatever the cutoff is working here. So keep that in mind. And I think this is a response to we're too busy to volunteer. Is a lot of parents want to demonstrate to their kids the importance of giving back. So it kind of is a way for them to spend time with their kids plus do that. So it's killing two birds with one stone. I would say don't forget people who are retired. So they may have more time to volunteer during the day, but they might not be around the entire year if they spend winter in a warmer climate. So I wonder, is there seasonal work that they could do during the day? Like I said, older seniors may need opportunities that respect their physical limitations or energy level. Once I worked with the church and we were doing the school partnership, and we said, you know, we have people who really want to help, but they maybe don't have the energy level to go in the school and actually work one-on-one with the kids. I mean, that said, I think we had an 85-year-old who went in and did that, who had a walker. You know, she loved it. But we asked the teachers, you know, what could people do at home? They said we make those fleece blankets where you don't sew, but you tie the sides together. I don't know if you've ever made that or had your kid in school who made one of those, but the teachers were spending hours and hours and hours cutting out all that fleece. They said we could really use some people to do that for us, and then it saves us time. You know, I've seen that young adults are often more interested in service involving travel. So if you're they might have the time in their lives or the freedom where they might be able to go somewhere else. And tip number 2 is to tap into your network of existing groups. So this is kind of going with the flow that you have. That's what the water faucet thing is. So if you already have a system of small groups, so it might be Bible study groups, affinity groups, like your singles groups, seniors groups, young adults, or even with your committees or boards. So I've seen churches say we don't just have to sit together once a month and look at the financial statements. We could actually get together and go do some service together. People really want to feel a sense of community when they're volunteering. So how can you help them deepen their relationships with people they already know in the church by adding volunteering to the experiences they share, I guess would be. So I don't see this as eclipsing anything else that you're doing in church, but it ought to be adding to it. So when you say we want people in our church to know each other, how can we put service opportunities into the mix for them to better accomplish that? And this is related to those types of volunteer opportunities, again, that people might be drawn to. So to create opportunities for frontline workers as well as behind the scenes folks. So some people like to be up in front leading an activity. Other people would really cringe at the thought, so they might be there to set up, come back to tear down, be working in the kitchen, those kinds of tasks. And then I would say to start in a focused way. So I don't think you ought to overwhelm your church members with too many opportunities. If this is kind of a new thing for you, you might mobilize volunteers to just one nonprofit or program. Or focus on one key issue in your community. So maybe it's working with children and youth. Maybe it's hunger, and you're going to mobilize people to serve meals or work at the food shelf, unloading things and filling the shelves and packing the bags. But I think if this is newer for your church, I would say to focus on a pretty small group of community partners. And if your church is small, it might just be one community partner, and you're offering maybe a couple kinds of volunteer opportunities. So I'll take questions in a minute, and then here again is, there's my Juno address, so if you would like to contact me with questions or ideas, or if you've got some interest in talking about consulting, we can talk by phone. That's always free. And then here's the community ministry book available through Judson. So this is the second model that I cover out of the 7, is mobilizing volunteers. So there's a lot more than what I said today in the book. But now I am open to take some questions.
All right. Joy, we do have a couple of questions from our attendees, and I'm going to open the line to Karen. Hello, Karen. Karen, your line is now open. Okay. Maybe she'll type it in, or maybe she's having audio. We have a second person who has a question, and it's Nancy Greer.
Hi, Nancy.
Hello?
Yeah, I wonder if people can just type the questions in, and then Linda will read them, and I can talk them through with you.
Yes. Yes, you have the option to either type it in using the question icon located in your control panel on the right, or you can raise your hand and then I will open up the line to you.
I'd be interested in hearing how people, if you just even have comments on how you deal with this issue of people not having time to volunteer. And it's one of the main issues that I hear when I do work with churches, because even to get people to sign up for the things inside the church can be challenging, like teaching Sunday school or working on some basic hospitality things at church, which I never sign up for those. So they always seem like they just happen, but the reality is in my church there's about 10 people that are always working on that all the time to make sure coffee hour happens, etc. So yeah, I'm wondering how people deal with this time issue.
Joy, I do not see any additional questions at this time. So what I would recommend is if you have a follow-up question, Joy has provided her email address, um, and you can reach out to her or you can reach out to me. Either way, we will get you an answer. Um, so, Joy, once again, thank you so much for your time. Very informative as always. To the audience, I encourage you to learn more about 7 creative models for community ministry. It could be found on the Judson Press website at www.judsonpress.com. And when you order online, you do receive a 20% discount. I also invite you to join us for our upcoming webinars, and you can find out more information about those by logging onto the website and going to the news and notes section on the right-hand side of the web page. So once again, thank you all very much for your participation and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.